All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Michael Bonacci from Aurora WDC, and today we have the pleasure of hosting Gabriel Andebjork from Commentelli, who is founder and CFO of Commentelli and leads and builds up the international presence of their business. Today, Gabriel will take us through how intelligence portals boost productivity by automating collection of information. And before I hand it over to Gabriel, please submit your questions via the questions pane, and I will moderate those questions when Gabriel is finished. Gabriel, the floor is yours.
Michael, thank you very much. Can I just check that you hear me, Michael, so that indicates that everyone else hears me?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, welcome to you all, and thank you very much for spending this hour with me and Michael on this topic of boosting productivity by automation of collecting of information. First and foremost, for those of you who have never seen me, now I'm going to get this one work. There you go. This is me. So now we have a face behind the voice as well. I have been working in the field of intelligence for the last 20 years approximately, and we have been working a lot with both content aggregation as well as IT platforms. So hopefully I will be able to share some insights with you with that background and that you can make some use of going forward. Very short about our company. We've been on the market since '99. We're running a software platform called Intelligence Today that we deliver primarily to larger companies, but also in a professional version that is available for very small teams. We focus on knowledge management and competitive intelligence, so that's also a reason why we appear in this particular perspective. But enough about us. We are going to talk primarily about two different things this hour. Firstly, if we're going to automate collection of information, we need to realize that behind that are different kinds of sources. So I will spend some time discussing sourcing strategy at a sort of top-level thinking of how to build that up, what different kinds of sources are there, etc. And the second part of the presentation will be directed to the platforms and how do they operate, how can we automate, and what are the gains in automating these kinds of operations. But let's start with the collection. When we collect information, we need to start in the position of finding out what we need. And these are very generic statements, but typically when you ask people, you would get the first bullet in this first section. Gathering information for intelligence purposes need to adhere to three things, not just the first one, which would be gather the information we know we need. That is what you very often encounter when you start looking into intelligence processes. You more rarely encounter people realizing that we also need to gather information we do not know we need, but do need. That is, of course, a much trickier task. And as we are in the age of information tsunamis, a third equally important statement is that we have to avoid all information we know we do not need. Otherwise, our systems will be entirely cluttered by noise and unnecessary information. But then, of course, the question is, what do we mean by need? There are also things that we need to consider in that question. The first one is that, obviously, we need to find information that supports our continuous and successful deployment of current strategy on all levels in a corporation that we're supporting with this information flow. When we mean all levels, not just the strategic C-level part of the company, but also local sales teams out in the organization somewhere that need support to make sure that they do their job as good as they can based on the company's strategic position. But secondly, we also need information that challenges the current strategy. Very many companies have run into problems because they are not prone to that kind of gathering. They focus entirely on finding information that supports where they already are and the plans and the direction in which they're going, and they forget to constantly try to find, if you like, uncomfortable information, things that are challenging the current thinking and things that might not be what the C-level group is looking for. Those two in combination will help us find out how shall we sort of package our content selection strategy when we get to that point. Now, where do we find this information? Well, we can generalize, and this is a great generalization. There are 4 categories of sources. There are 2 categories to start with. The first one is external sources, and the second one is internal sources. And this is, of course, versus the company that you're operating within. If you split external sources into 2 sections, you would find open sources such as web news sources, social media, etc., which is, of course, the majority of all the information that is easily attainable today if you're setting up some sort of information collection strategy. The second one is commercial sources such as analysis companies, news bureaus, and commercial databases. There's a lot of those around. If we back the clock to the time when I started working in this field many years ago, that was really the only thing that we could find. You had to procure various kinds of subscriptions from large content providers. Then later on came the internet, and we had a situation where the big content providers went through really dire times, much because people tended to think that as soon as we can find it on the internet, it's free and we can find everything there. Well, it has turned out that that might not really have been the case, and we will come back to that in a few minutes. The second section that we had, internal sources. When I say internal sources, I'm sure that most of you reflect upon that as the second bullet here, namely the content that we have in our LAN drives, SharePoints, CRM systems, etc. And even though that is a very underutilized asset in many companies, even more underutilized is the first one, which I call observers or sensors, also known as your employees and colleagues throughout your company. In most intelligence operations that I see and have seen, this is a dismally used resource for many reasons, but let's look into how we can actually make them more participating in the collection as well by the means of automation when we come to that point. Finally, when we look into the sort of the categorization of sources, let's have a look at the commercial sources broken down a little bit more than we had on the previous slide. There are really 4 types, and now we're breaking them down a little bit along their own business models. We have aggregators of free or open source, if you like, content, which typically are exemplified by web crawlers or so-called agents, some type of Google services, and the pricing of those range from almost nothing up to fairly costly services, and it all depends on how much this particular provider helps the customer in organizing this open or free content that is crawled from the internet and other sites. The other one is aggregators of commercial content. And I'm sure you all recognize my examples here, such as Dow Jones, Factiva, Reuters, Lexis, etc., that are selling the service of getting many professional news bureaus or state-owned bureaus, etc., into one feed and one database of information that you can then utilize without having to go to the all those different commercial sources separately. That's a really good fundamental feed in most CI system these days, to have some of those contents provided. Then we have a group of pure originators of content. Those are companies that create the content themselves, but all they do is that they sell the content. And the reason I bring that up is that if we talk to aggregators of commercial content, they are very much dependent on copyright rules, etc., from their providers. When it comes to originators of content, even though they don't have any additional services on top, they can control the pricing of the content that they provide in a more, if you like, customized way than the aggregators of commercial content, which comes into play when we're going to choose different kinds of sources and the distribution of their content in a large organization. And finally, we have consulting companies with a content delivery component. These are, I would say, the most flexible companies when it comes to choosing exactly what we want to have delivered. On the other hand, they tend to be the most pricey. So we have everything from very, very cheap and free content up to the left and down to what has to be considered as rather high quality and personalized content down to the right. Now, how does all these different factors bring the picture together? Well, you can actually build a little framework around this, and I'm going to go to show this as an example. I'm sure you can find other mixes as well, but what we have here are all the sources on your left column, if you like, the open sources, the 4 different kinds of commercial sources, beginning with C1 being the aggregators of free and down to the consulting services in C4. And those A1 and B1, etc., those are the combinations of the different needs we had before. So A is we know what we need is, and B is what we need but don't know, and C is what we know we don't need. Whereas the 1 and the 2s are if it's going to support the strategy or challenge the strategy. So if we get this little framework in place, we can start looking at the boxes and see what kind of sourcing are we going to do depending on what we're looking for. And first and foremost, of course, the C columns are things we want to avoid. And with the amount of information that we have coming in from, for instance, feeds and RSS feeds and web crawlers, etc. these days, the 2 top boxes under the open sources within C1 and C2, this is where we really need to filter the information that comes in to get rid of things that is not relevant for our current and or future business had it been challenged. That is one area where we definitely need automation. We can have some other examples if we look in the B2 column, namely what we don't know we need about challenging our strategy. As I've written in the right down corner here, those 2 boxes here, observers and content in this field is probably your most competitive edge if you're able to find that information internally in your company that challenges the strategy based on things we from a CI perspective really don't know that we need. So if you can find a feedback loop that helps us finding that, it's tremendous. Going up 1 box, we can see that we definitely need to find those things about what we don't know but that will challenge us. This is typically something that we could ask a consulting company, analysis company, to help out with and to position that as, yes, definitely expensive but necessary. Again, failure to find out what is in those boxes down here has rendered many companies great losses because they simply miss things that is going on in the market because they're not finding that. On the other side, I would say that all these boxes up here, they are the traditional CI areas. Finding information that we know we need and that supports our strategy so we can make sure that we execute as well as we can on this on the current strategy. And if we go down to those boxes down here, this is where you would find the traditional knowledge management operations. Again, we need to find what we know about what we can do internally. So what are our capabilities versus the strategy that we're operating in. Now I'm not going to dig down further into this framework, but it's a way of working with sourcing that you might want to have a look at and see if you can fit in your own content providers and your own content work into it and see if there are any gaps that you might want to fill. So do we always get this accepted? No. If we talk to people around, we always have this comment coming back. But why do we do this? What is so complicated? Can't we just Google it? Many years ago, one of the prominent CI professionals in Skip, and I quote, said, if we don't watch out, the CI profession will be reduced to Google and send, Google and send, Google and send. There was a great belief in that the internet search engines should eventually take over all the tedious work that we have to work with in terms of sourcing information. But today we know better. You have to watch out with these. The relevance, again, Google is not really what I would say a search engine per se when it comes to knowledge management or intelligence. It's paid ads and very much popularity driven. So Google makes sure you see what Google believes you want to see, not in chronological order or any other kind of ratings. Google does not index every page on the internet, far from. Hence, it does not cover all the sources you need, and even so, many sources you need are not really available on the internet. So that's another reason of not trusting open search engines. And then again, when it comes to processing information, there are many tools that are significantly better in aggregating content in a meaningful way than search engines like Google like. And finally, if you're in CI, and maybe if you're working in a sensitive area of CI, such as mergers and acquisitions or financing, whatever, security is also an issue, because you do leave traces behind as soon as you work with any of those big search engines. So just beware when we trust the internet search engines too much. It's really an advice to consider some commercial content as well, and I can happily say that because I'm not at all in that business. So that is more a an experience that I can definitely share with you and advice. So that was the basics of the different kinds of sources that we can work with. Before we go to the platform, just like to have another perspective of the content as well. And this is something where I call information versus disciplines of usage. Let's have a look at this one. We have the internal and external sources here at the bottom again, so we can recognize them. But if we position them versus what the information is about, if the information is about others, and then it's not necessarily just our competitors, it could be customers, suppliers, regulators, it could be any player, if you like, on the market that we're addressing with our strategy. Or if it is about us. So this would be internal information about our our capabilities, our resources, what we can do to meet the needs on the market. Now, if we take those two sort of dimensions here, and look at them, we can really map them against 4 standard disciplines that we have in our company. External sources about ourselves, it's typically the public relations department that works with that. They are trying to follow up what is being said on the market regarding our own company. We want to know if we're sort of well spoken about, or if there are negative publicity going out, etc. Interesting for intelligence, no doubt, but maybe not the key mandate of the intelligence professionals. However, when it comes to external sources about others, I know that maybe, or most likely, there's someone in the audience right now saying, hang on a minute, I'm working with intelligence and I'm definitely working with external sources. And yes, indeed you are. But if we look at where we have the key disciplines, it's typically market research that is working with that kind of intake of information about the market. It could be sales figures, it could be customer statistics, etc., etc. And the advice that we're trying to say is that if you're in intelligence, make use of those resources internally if they are available, because they will help you make life more efficient. And if there are no such market research, this is where you would typically gain time and down the line be more cost efficient if you use commercial sources to help you. There are companies out there that are built for the purpose of providing other companies with information about their market and other players. So why not make use of that? And if then look at our own capabilities from internal sources, that is obviously something that you will find in all your database stacks and hard drives, etc. And if there is a knowledge management activity in the company, they would typically be able to help with making sure that you can access that kind of information. If it isn't, we can use the platforms that we're going to talk about in a few minutes to address that. Now, that leaves the competitive intelligence aspect of this slide with one mandate left, and that is bringing all that together, bringing the understanding of others coming from the market research and understanding of ourselves into one synthesis of our capabilities versus the market, which is the type of advice that is typically sought for from an intelligence organization. And I'm going to use this a little bit later in the presentation just as a sort of food for thought when we discuss how we're going to work with the different content sourcings. Few more words on that. Step one, making use of internal information. What's so specific about that? Well, from an information management perspective, intelligence and knowledge management all share the same processes and challenges, namely finding what we already know. The little man in the right-hand corner here with all the documents is there to illustrate how many people that we talk to feels today when they're trying to find information even on their own computer, let alone the local area network. We need to find a way of sorting that up, making sure that the information the company is already sitting on is being mapped and made available to people within the organization based on what they need. We have this continuous question, where is the information? And even worse, who knows about this? How can we find that? These are challenges that needs to be met, and they typically have a bearing on the intelligence and the knowledge management fields. If we look at the external information, it's the same, but of course we can find it worldwide. So where do we find it, and are there any people out there knowing what we need help with? And the answer, well, again, we talked about that. Google, Baidu, etc. Well, we need help with this. External information is far too abundant and overwhelming, and it needs filtering. So what we need here is to find what we need, but only what we need. In the former slide, it said finding what we already know that we have. So those two in combination can be portrayed like this. Now, how do we make this happen? Well, finding what we already know and finding what we need, but only what we need. In the first one, connect directly to an enterprise information access platform. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. And the second, finding what we need, but only what we need. Professional content providers and analysts can make a great help here, and we strongly advise the support of those. But you can, of course, also, if you have a capable piece of software, use that for crawling and scouting and automating, filtering in such a way that you're not being drowned in a noise of unnecessary and irrelevant information. So let's move to the technology behind this that we're going to talk about, the intelligence portal. Now again, we talked about some content model, how we can fragment and frame out the different types of sources, and we also had a look at the different usage disciplines of those sources. Now, how do we get into the technology? Well, first question is just to sort of make sure that we all share the same picture. Why do we need automation? Why do we need to automate the reading of information? Well, let's say, I don't know about you, but when I wake up in the morning and I turn on my computer or maybe my smartphone, the amount of information that I can scout on my way to work or over the morning coffee is limited to, I don't know, a couple of handfuls of articles. You scan the headlines and maybe you find something of interest. There was a time when we opened the morning papers over the breakfast, and I absolutely positive that no one had a chance of even reading one issue of the Financial Times or a paper alike over just breakfast. These are enormous papers in terms of content. So how do we do it? Well, the problem is that it's not one issue of Financial Times that is out there every morning. It's thousands in terms of the amount of information that needs to be scouted. And this graph just illustrates what we're talking about, that it's for many, many, many years it's been a sort of slowly, gradually increasing number of information elements that is being originated over time. And during the last 20 years or 30 years, this has gone completely berserk. There's no one today can manually scout through the amount of information that is being presented to us. We simply need tools to do that if we're going to find our way through this haystack or tsunami or whatever you like to call the amount of information that we have access to. So something needs to be done. Now let's have a look at a case before we run into the actual platform. We made a calculation on a case some time ago, and everything in terms of content procurement and acquisition was centralized and automated. Now, this of course costs money to do, but it was actually a cost reduction when it came to the content level of 1 million euro per year, saved in real terms on an annual basis, as we could, in that particular project, reduce the number of procurement points in the company that was operating this intelligence. At the same time, as it was perfectly possible to negotiate the contracts, the number of receivers could increase from a couple of hundreds, namely those who had bought it on a one-by-one basis, up to hundreds to maybe 10,000, depending on what kind of copyright material there was on these different kind of providers. And if we then take the step to discuss the value of more informed decisions throughout the company, it's probably unmeasurable. There are theories for how you can measure that, but we got feedback that were non-quantifiable, if you like, but that by any measure covered the cost for the program that was put in place. So if there are any arguments anywhere that it seems to be costing money to set these kinds of platforms and projects in place, yes, but do have a look at the savings side as well as the increased margin side as well, and typically that would sort it all out. Now, technology. What is an intelligence platform? Well, it's very simple. It's a single centralized IT platform for collecting, storing, processing, and disseminating information. And again, information can come from any of those content sources that we discussed earlier. So what we have in this funnel picture is the internal sources and the external sources, and all these are going to go into the same system to be normalized, aggregated into one format, indexed by a search engine, and classified into a customized for the user company specified taxonomy or tagging operation in the system, so that anyone in the company can use it based on their different kinds of mandates. There could be analysts, there could be executives, all employees, and I typically take a fictive sales guy who's sitting somewhere in let's say Brazil, for the sake of the Olympic Games that just passed, and Pedro in Brazil has the mandate to sell 3 particular products to the market. He knows about 2 competitors and some other stuff that is important for his sales, and he should be able to set the system to filter out and alert him at any time when any news comes in or any analysis pops up that has a bearing on his mandates in his job. So the portal in itself is really just a very intelligent funnel, bringing in information, sorting it out, and making sure that whoever is using it gets out exactly what he or she needs in their daily job. Question then, so why? Well, a CI portal, it enables and automates your CI processes, and it frees up significant amount of time. Many companies are still struggling with the problem of the information overload situation. So most of the time is being used for not just searching but also aggregating what is being found and synthesized into, in sometimes just one single newsletter in an entire corporation. And the problem with one newsletter in a large organization is that there's no one size fits all. So what will happen is that newsletter is very bleak to most readers because it's not focused on their particular work aspect. A good intelligence portal should be designed to support the intelligence works both for CI producers and CI consumers. Now, my example just a minute ago was much on the CI consumer side, but when it comes to the CI producers, we have a situation there. If you want to produce such a newsletter, you must sit there, gather, cut, paste, bring in your Word document and everything. What a CI portal should do is really to do the bulk of the handwork for you, making sure that you, in essence, get on a daily basis the basics for all the different newsletters that you want to provide. And then all the CI professionals should do in this case is to tidy them up, maybe edit some of them, add some comments, and send out through the portal again. So it's really a question of increasing efficiency for any analyst using the system. What is also interesting when you introduce a portal like this is that it helps building up an intelligence culture. It becomes a service in your company. With time, many people can use it, and it starts building that awareness that CI is important, and if used in the right way, this is where you will start probing your own employees in the company to feed back information to you and become observers, as we said in the beginning of the presentation. You can probe users to comment on articles, and eventually you will be able to suggest that people can actually feed in without being probed through mobile interfaces or directly through their computers, and even add a little bit of gamification to that process in order to make it, in clear terms, more fun to contribute. And that is a situation when you have really started to getting a dynamics into the CI operations, when people who are not even close to the CI organization per se starts contributing like that. This is a little bit on the same line, but a CI portal is really an excellent marketing tool as well. Again, as I said, it's a service to your company, and it's something that you can market. It's tangible. All the company users can access it at any time during the day when they like. They are not sort of dependent on having to call someone or having to talk to someone. They can consume CI at their leisure, if you like, and that is something that builds up the presence of CI, or, if you like, top of mind of many people in an organization. So what is important then for intelligence in terms of information and platform buildup? Well, we're talking to SLA here, so I know that you're very well equipped with insights about taxonomies. And an intelligence taxonomy should reflect the industry and the highlight information that is important to the organization. Now, one major difference when building, let's say, a knowledge management taxonomy and an intelligence taxonomy is that many taxonomies these days that we've seen in knowledge management tend to be built in order to explain what we already have. We're taking the document base of a large company and we start looking into what those documents tend to cover, and then we build that into a taxonomy to make that document base much more searchable. When building an intelligence taxonomy, we don't care at all about what we already have at hand. We're building the taxonomy on the basis of what the company needs, and that need is driven from the 2 points that we discussed earlier, namely the current strategy, and to some extent, as much as we can know, and in each point, the strategy challenges that we are foreseeing. If that is built into the taxonomy, and the taxonomy is then programmed in such a way that is going to automate the gathering of the information, the filtering of the information, we might very well find topics that are entirely empty. If we do so, it's just proving that we're not gathering the right information in certain areas of our topic tree, and in some areas it might be overflow, and then we have to look more into the filtering and see if there may be some discrepancies in how we're describing our strategy. But this is a major difference between traditional taxonomy design and intelligence taxonomy design that needs to be sort of iterated and understood. We're going to look a little bit more into that in a few slides from now, but just bear that in mind when we talk about taxonomies coming forward here now, because the intelligence taxonomies are slightly different compared to others. This is more of a summary picture, really. In automating retrieval, what we have, again, is our external sources, both the open and commercial, and the internal content. Now, if you are putting in place an intelligence platform, it should be a platform that has the connectors, so you could easily connect external sources as well as internal sources. For instance, being integrated with SharePoint, maybe taking feeds out of an SAP system or a CRM system, etc., and bringing all that into the portal system, categorized and shown on various specialists' dashboards, so they can start working with it and producing CI, if you like, to the greater audience. But we also have the sensors, and there are various ways that we can have sensors getting information into the portal. Emailing is one perfectly workable solution. Another one is having mobile apps. So if we have someone on a conference center, attending a conference in your industry, easily take a picture with a smartphone, just upload it with a comment, and in it goes automatically categorized and up to the right analyst that could then assess that information. There's a number of different ways of doing so, but the whole purpose with getting the sensors connected is to make the interface between people who want to provide information to the portal as easy as possible. It will never work if we have to have them come into their office, turn on the computer, and do this as a very, very special task. We all know that. We're lazy. So unless I can do it exactly when I feel that, oh, I've got something to share, it will most likely not happen. And again, it all boils down to this little framework I introduced in the beginning. So which of these different boxes are we going to get into these feeds, and which of the sensors areas, these are the observers down here, are we going to focus on in the beginning to get it into the system? This varies from company to company, so I'm just providing this as a framework for thought when you're going to take this to the next step. And we're talking about automation. So what kinds of automation is it that we're discussing? Well, we just discussed retrieval automation, how to retrieve information. Now, then we have processing. And what is it that we can automate when it comes to processing? Well, the first is, of course, indexing and tagging. And indexing, that's very straightforward because it's search engine technology. So if you have a capable search engine in place, it will index the content that you bring into your platform. Tagging is slightly different because tagging is something that has to be programmed. When you build up the taxonomy in the system, each topic in your taxonomy has to be programmed with a little search script, so it recognizes when it should be tagging a particular piece of information that comes in. Those topic structures are the ones that are being derived from your strategy and your market views. It's very important that that kind of tagging, the tagging system, is built properly from the beginning. But when in place, it will help you read, enormous amounts of information without having to consider your morning papers and that limited ability. Also, you can't automate approving and editing in its own sense. I mean, someone needs to do this, but you can automate the process of making sure that the right experts can approve the right content. So when a CI professional logs in the morning or has a view on the cell phone, they will have a list of articles or content items that needs approval depending on how they want to disseminate it, and it should be very easy for them to do so on whatever kind of device they're using. Same thing, assessing relevancy, that can be semi-done by the taxonomy, but it can also be significantly speeded up by making sure that the user and the analyst gets a visual perspective of the content in the system in such a way that they can quickly select a bunch of items and assess them maybe to another topic or another distribution channel than what was originally intended by the automation. To being able to recommend, we are all very prone to reading things that other people have read and said, well, this is worthwhile reading, because even if we're filtering information in systems like this, we are overwhelmed by the amount of information. It's just too much. So if we really find a system where others can recommend that this is worthwhile for me to read, that is also something that is tremendously useful and should be enabled in a very simple process by a platform like this. Translation can be automated these days. So if we're a global company and we know that we have a number of different big languages, it should be easy for the user to say that, well, I'm Spanish, so I'd like to have everything initially translated into Spanish, and then if I need to dig down into the original language, I can do that, but I'd like to have my overview in this particular case in my language. Spanish might be one of the big languages that many people can speak, but let's say we can introduce Chinese or some Eastern European languages into this, and we're suddenly down to a very narrow section of Western people that will be able to understand what's being written or communicated. And of course, we want to be able to have the system selecting different types of content for different target groups. And there you go again. If we have my Pedro in Brazil in his particular little segment of the business, he couldn't care less about what's going on in Italy right now. He wants his information for his sales team in Brazil, and that is what the system should be able to take care of. Now, On the previous picture, we had a typical portal page just to make sure that we understand that dissemination automation also, of course, includes automated alerts to my smartphone if anything comes in that has anything to do with my current customer or prospect that I'm negotiating with. I, of course, want to know that now, not tomorrow. So we have to have a situation where the system can be set to alert me without any approval on things that has been retrieved and that has a bearing on the current business I'm involved in. And the same goes for new reports and newsletters. If my CI team produces different types of reports and newsletters, I couldn't expect them to know which of those that I'm interested in. So there should be an automation situation where I can tell the system that anything that is being produced by the CI team within the fields that I'm interested in, please alert me so I can read more in detail and maybe then go back to the CI team for further explanations. But again, I mean, that is the sort of the automation purpose of the entire picture. Now, does this system or this kind of system, does it work all by itself? Well, it has to be continuously tuned. Let's start again with my little framework of content. These are all the different sources that we are using. So these boxes up here are more or less prevailing in getting content into my platform. So here it comes. So far, so good. But we also know that the filtering here is done by a taxonomy. It's done by automation rules. So that must come from somewhere. Well, we come to that point because what this will provide us with is, of course, an outflow of usage information. So users can either log on to the system, watch it, see what's there, or they can consume it through alerts or their mobile devices. But parts of this must also go back to a taxonomy review. So information comes in, information is being published into the platform, and on a continuous basis, we need to reassess if we're actually running the best taxonomy for our users. And once we've done that, we have to go back to the process of sourcing with new needs specifications. So the taxonomy is not just a filtering tool, it is also a source selection tool. As I said in the beginning, or not in the beginning, but some time ago, if we find an empty topic, it might be a very important topic, and for some reason we don't catch information within that topic, then we have to go back to our sources and figure out why. Is it a very narrow topic in a sense that we really do not find information there, or have we simply tuned our sources in such a way that they're not delivering sufficient amount of information within that field? This is an ongoing activity, and when we discuss taxonomies in an automation perspective, it's very, very important to realize once a taxonomy is in place, it's very much a living animal, as I tend to call it. Just think about a dimension of a taxonomy that would be the companies you're interested in. It can be your competitors or your customers or suppliers, and suddenly there is a merger between two customers. That has to have an impact on the taxonomy and the way that companies are portrayed and the way that those particular companies are portrayed as they're now one company. So that in one way or the other, the topics has to be merged, and you need to make sure that anyone who is looking for the one company actually realizes that they're now looking for the other company as well. So taxonomies need to be maintained, and when you maintain the taxonomy, it will have a bearing on the content sourcing as well, which of course will have a bearing on what we see in the system and so forth. So this is a continuous cycle that can never sort of be put to rest, because then very soon the intelligence platform will start becoming out of date. So that is sort of the key of this automation discussion, making sure that all these things work smoothly together. How does this take off now in a company? Well, again, a case. Let's have a look at this one. This is a 2-year, 8-quarter case of a project that we actually documented quite in detail. What this one the graph shows unique weekly visitors in a CI service portal. So very much what we're discussing right now. And in the first quarter of this project, there was a launch of the system. Initially, it was just maybe a few hundred users. This is a large company, by the way. We're talking about a 100,000 people company, just to put it in perspective. It starts off with the launch. There are some information to the preliminary or primary, sorry, not preliminary, but primary target groups, the key users. And once the system, after about a quarter or two, is up and running in such a way that those operating the system felt that, well, now it's really time to start making some noise about the system. A major marketing campaign in the internal corporate newspaper was launched, and that lifted the user base from just underneath 1,000 users up to about 10,000 users in a quarter. There was a number of sort of interest-waking activities that were launched during that period, and it works very well. Then we came up to a critical mass achieved, and there was a word of mouth marketing taking off. So now the awareness of the system was definitely in place. 10,000 users having tried a system out of 100,000, that's enough for making sure that people know about it. And of course, out of the 100,000 people, there was definitely not even, let's say, 30, 40,000 that would have an interest in a system like this. So the penetration of 10,000 was already that time very, very good penetration. Interesting to see, though, is that there was a definite decline after this peak of 10,000. So the one-time users, if you like, that had a quick look at it and said, well, this is not really for me, they didn't come back. Maybe a year or two later, we don't know that, but there was definitely a decline. But at the same time, new users came on. So the decline was that more people that had just tried it out left than people that came on, but new people also came on all the time. And it kept declining for a quarter or two, and then it started climbing again. And what had happened there was that there was, as we've written here, the general awareness was achieved and user growth came into some sort of linear curve, much in line with that the CI services became more and more well known throughout this company. So it's an interesting graph. We're not at all trying to say that all companies will follow the same path, but the whole idea of seeing the CI portal as a service to the entire corporation and having a sort of planned development path, something like what you're seeing on the screen right now, could prove to be of very, very great usage. If a company invests in a platform like this, they of course want as many people as possible to become part of the general awareness of the market, so that you find a penetration in this case coming up towards 17,000 people, maybe 18,000 people after 2 years, out of that was the assessed interest group of somewhere between 30,000 40,000, is an enormous success. So and the thing is that it wasn't that hard for the company to do so once it all had taken off and achieved the critical mass. So the advice is think about this when rolling out a platform like this and see if you can sort of mimic a little bit about this development, but also beware now that these are 8 quarters we're talking about. I have also seen companies that hope to see an enormous explosion of usage within a quarter or two, and it takes time. It's something that has to be put in place. It has to grow gradually. You can do different kind of activities in order to increase the awareness of the product or the platform, but it will take time however we do it. And I think that is a good thing to realize if and when you're planning to put something like this in operation. So, summary, if we're looking for systems, what do we must have if you are going to automate this? Well, the content aggregation, as we discussed, we can't forget that one. It needs to be able to connect to content from both internal and external sources, ability to add RSS, web crawler feeds, obviously. You need to be able to produce reports, ability to input via web and mobile interface to have your sensors or observers active in the content management. Classification, we've been through that. We need a taxonomy and we need indexing and everything. users must be able to do free text search on top of all the different types of services that the taxonomy will provide, and user experience and distribution has to be on top all the time, so ability to access, ability to create personalized email alerts, etc. So I can really feel that this is something for not just the general audience, it's something for me as a user. These are things that you definitely need to make sure that they are present in any system you're considering. Then of course there are some additional, more if you like, should have or actually nice to have or fun stuff that can be of great usage in a system like this, and that is of course visual analytics that I mentioned before, helping users and particularly analysts to view the content in a more structured way. Collaboration tools, we're so used to social networks out there right now, so any system that hasn't got any kind of collaboration, I think it will be a problem platform to put in place these days. And of course there are something to say about administration and security and scalability, etc. Depending of course on how big the implementation is planned to be over time, but sometimes you don't know that, so it's a good idea to at least have the scalability with you when you consider any such implementation. So I realize we are now 10 to 5, so I hope this has been a useful brief of the gains of using automation when you put in place an intelligence portal. I think this is the point where I would say, Michael, if you have moderated some questions, I think it's time to answer those.
Yeah, thanks, Gabriel. Great presentation. I couldn't agree more with everything you've laid out there, and certainly very insightful and helpful for people looking to tackle this challenge. Folks, please send in your questions via the question pane, and I will be sure to get those over to Gabriel so he can answer those. We do have a few minutes left. You know, Gabriel, I don't necessarily have a question, but you brought out a few points that I just want to highlight, and I thought were very pertinent and relevant to me, especially the first one, the Google argument. You know,
Yeah.
you see this all the time, and I think as a practitioner, if you're out there looking to tackle, you know, intelligence portals, I think be ready to explain and tackle that challenge, because that'll be one of the first things you hear from your executives when you go to ask for some money. You know, the other one was you can't automate approval and automation. You know, I think we see that a lot from people that expect these portals and technology to basically do everything, and you just sit back and watch everything happen. So I thought that was another great point, Gabriel, as well.
Yeah. If I can play in there, Michael, there's actually sometimes I get a question, can the portal do analysis? And I'm a little bit tough on that one. I say, no, there's no software at all that can do analysis. Software can help structure and visualize information so that humans can do the analysis. Absolutely,
dead on. We get that a lot, too often. And it's a question you don't like to hear, because I think sometimes that's a telltale signal that the actual buyer may not be educated on the type of product they actually need. And then the other point was, you know, you got to continuously fine tune, like you said, the living animal that's out there.
Yeah.
I think that's certainly important. Otherwise, you may see dips in your readership and your user base and all that good stuff. So I did have a question for you, though. And I'm not sure if you are seeing this as well, but the growing trend of, you know, the functions of library, knowledge management, market research, and others coming together to sort of build and implement this portal at the same time. Whereas, you know, maybe 5 years ago, these portals were maybe tackled by the CI market intelligence function. Are you seeing the same thing? And then again, that importance of the taxonomy meeting when those groups come together. Any challenges to managing that sort of what I call de-siloing of those functions?
If I got your question right, there is definitely an increase in content provisioning companies such as consulting or just pure content providers in providing their own platform solutions. It's a little bit like when you go to a news page or a newspaper page, they send out RSS feeds in order to drag you into their particular platform for commercial reasons, and you know, that's the way papers make money these days when they're online. When it comes to professional content providers, it's a bit of a challenge, because the customer end obviously would like to have everything in one place, whereas the providers are trying to drag the industry in a way where they can control the customer by having them in their own platform. I think it will end up being the customer winning, as it has always been, but right now it's a little bit of a challenge to have some of the bigger providers letting their information go in feed terms into customers' own IT environments. I don't know if that is what your question was about, but I think I'm sort of touching on it as well, or did I misunderstand the question completely?
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think time will sort of play out and tell how that's going to shape up, but I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yep. Excellent. Well, I don't see any questions here, so Gabriel, thanks for bringing your knowledge and insights to the SLA Competitive Intelligence Division. Greatly appreciated, and everyone out there, you got Gabriel's contact information right in front of you, so any questions, please feel free to reach out to him directly. Thank you,
you're all welcome.
Gabriel.
Thank you, Michael.
And everybody have a great day, and we'll see you on the next SLA CI Division webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.